You have to be brave about selling. Ready, Fire, Aim. It's a book about entrepreneurship, starting your own business. I've had so many people tell me that they have $10 million businesses, $100 million businesses by using Ready, Fire, Aim as a template for building their business. I'm very grateful for it.
Ready, Fire, Aim.
The reason why this book is so powerful
I'm reading
is
Ready,
one of the
Fire,
best
Aim
business
by
books
Michael
that I've ever
Masterson
read.
right now.
Ready,
and
Fire, Aim.
Somehow, it seemed like I kind of always knew that one day I would become wealthy. I grew up typically not rich. There were 8 of us. My father was a professor, and at his height of earning, he was making $12,000 a year. You know, I used to literally dream of being rich. Most people don't achieve anything because they just have no goals and they just kind of wander through life. But some people, a minority of people, run into trouble because they have too many goals. I couldn't make up my mind. My thought was, well, hell, go for getting rich, because if you get rich, then you can work, later on you can buy your way into the other things. I knew my boss wanted to grow a big, successful business, and then I realized that what I could do to help him was to write newsletters that helped his customers make money and help sell subscriptions. I started to understand that selling, even investment products, was not just about selling hopes and dreams or promises. It was about other things too. It was about what the audience really wanted besides just making money with stocks and bonds and so on. And so I created my own product. It was a club. This turned out to be a blockbuster. Within a year, I had a net worth of almost $1 million. And so from then on, we built the business to revenues of $135 million. I was then making enough money that I could start writing. That's where I kind of laid out how I saw that entrepreneurship works and building businesses work. That was my special interest, taking a business from 0 to $1 million, then from $1 million to 10, then 10 to 50 or so, and then beyond that. I wanted to make sure that I had multiple income streams, like 5 or 6 income streams that eventually would each produce enough cash every year for me to pay for my lifestyle. And that's really what I did over the next 10 years or so. If my main business collapsed the next day, I would be fine. I still had income from other places. What you need to find out is, can I sell this product profitably? And how exactly do they do that? I call this the optimal selling strategy. You have to find that out as soon as you possibly can and do whatever you can to figure that out. Tell yourself that whatever this is, there's a way around it. And I'm not going to stop now. I'm going to get around it. You need to imagine the obstacles on the way, the failures, and ultimately the ultimate failure. I imagine the failures and the obstacles. And then I imagine what I do when somebody comes to me and said, this is the marketing report. This bombed. This idea bombed. How I'm going to react to it emotionally, which is very, very important, and what I'm going to say about it. And that's where I spend all my visualization, visualizing failures. The way I talk about it is making friends with your devil, your fear. What you're doing is you're preparing to move forward the moment that you run into an obstacle or the moment that you fail. Most importantly, you already have an emotion that isn't self-defeating, you're not crushed by it. You need to intend to make this thing work, but you need to emotionally detach from it working. Because if you don't, then it destroys your energy, your ego, and everything else when it fails.
So let's just start off with cheersing. Thank you for inviting me.
Cheers, great to be with you again.
Cheers. How did you make your fortune?
How long do you want the response to be?
As long as you wish it to be.
Well, I'll start with a short version. I grew up typically not rich. There were 8 of us. My father was a professor, And at his height of earning, he was making $12,000 a year. And so we lived in a small house with 10 people in a town where there were a lot of wealthy people, and then there was my community that lived literally on the other side of the track. And so I grew up with this, with this shame about being poor, and this, I used to literally dream of being rich. I started working just as soon as I possibly could for money, doing things I did the regular paper boy routine and so on. Any jobs I could get, when I was 12, I was working weekends in a car wash. Because I was small, they put two of us small people to do the inside of the car. This is a production machine. And we would one of us would jump in the front and the other would jump in the back, and we'd spray and wipe and clean everything, and then we'd move on. And so, I always had at least one job. And that money, I never saved. I always spent on status symbols, shoes that were, I remember one pair I got distinctly to this day when I was 14 or so. It was a pair of, there's a name for them, a pair of brown leather shoes that had one buckle that comes over. And I was so proud of that. It cost $35 at the time, which would probably be, like $200 today. And so, yeah, that was the thing. My house was kind of dumpy, and I didn't want people to see it, and there's lots of that. But my family was academic, and so my father had an academic background, my mother had a theatrical background, and so we grew up as kids that were well educated and had expectations of us to become either teachers, which half of my siblings became, or to go into the arts, the theater, which the other half. There were two exceptions. One of my brothers, which is the only brother that didn't finish university, he went into business, and I didn't mean to go into business. I didn't know what I meant to do, but I joined the Peace Corps after I had my master's degree, and I was living in Long Beach, and I had various jobs, Long Beach, New York, and I had various jobs, and I applied to go to the Peace Corps, to be in the Peace Corps, just because it seemed like an interesting option, and I thought I could go overseas, somebody would pay for my trip, and maybe I could learn a foreign language, and so I got invited to join, and it was quite an accomplishment to even be invited to join, because the Peace Corps was very competitive those days. Mm-hmm. There were, many called, but few were chosen, and I had a choice between Togo, and they called me up to tell me, Togo and Chad, and I felt that I was still being interviewed when they asked me which would I prefer to go to. Mm-hmm. So I pretended I had a quick emergency, and give me a second, and I ran over to the other side of the room and started searching the globe, looking for, what hemisphere these countries might have been in. Mm-hmm. And I discovered that they weren't. My first thought was maybe they were somewhere in Latin America, or I finally located them in Africa. And one was a small country that was on the coast, but it was very small, and the other was a big country kind of right in the middle. Mm-hmm. So I said Chad, as it turned out that Togo has a very rich culture. It's got the ocean. It's got all kinds of things going for it. Chad is basically, a clump of desert and savanna in the middle of Africa, and one of the 2 or 3 poorest countries in the world at the time. But I went over there to teach English at the University of Chad, and while I was there, I I did a lot of writing because I thought maybe I wanted to be a writer, and it was good. I after 9 months, I contacted my former girlfriend. We had decided to separate and see, if it was a real thing or not, and I proposed marriage, and she agreed, and then she came over to join me with the little dog we had adopted, which is a whippet, and that was a little bit first of many humiliating experiences there because whippets. I don't know if you know whippets are like tiny greyhounds. They're like small greyhounds. There's an actually smaller version. It's called an Italian greyhound, but in other words, they're extremely skinny dogs, and they happen to look exactly like Chadian dogs, which were starving dogs, and and so nobody could understand. Local people never could understand why we never fed our dog. That we kept a dog that looked like he had never been fed. Anyway, so Kathy joined me, and we lived there that was 9 months into, for another year and a half or so, and lived in a very simple abode. First, I lived in an apartment before Kathy joined me, and then I wrangled my way into getting an apartment because I was the editor of the Peace Corps newsletter there, and I was doing all these extra jobs, and so the head of the local Peace Corps allowed us to have an apartment, and it was it was an apartment that was filled with other teachers from Russia, from France, from who knows where, and that's how we began our marriage. And I was fine. We lived in this cute little house that it was, basically a mud and brick house that had 3 little rooms, and we had outdoor plumbing and cold water, and a little porch. And one of my colleagues, at the University of Chad where I taught, was an American, and he lived right across the way from us, and we almost shared a backyard. He had a dog too. And I just remember sitting there one day, and it was raining, and both of our dogs were like jumping up, they were barking at monkeys that were on our roofs. And it was just such a pleasant, beautiful moment. And I remember thinking that someday you're going to go back to the States and you're going to get rich and live in a big house, but it will never be a nicer house than that. I mean, I was reminding myself of it. I'm telling you this story because there were 2 times when I was younger when I had no ambitions for wealth, that I somehow assumed I would get wealthy. The other time was in a literature class, in a writing class in college. We had to write a letter to ourselves that we would read in 20 years or so. And my letter was all about, well, how you doing now that you've abandoned all your communist ideology and you've sold yourself into capitalism, and and thinking back on that now, it does seem funny. I just wonder, somehow it seemed like I kind of always knew that one day I would become wealthy. But I wasn't doing anything in pursuit of that directly, nor did I think, consciously, or if I was in a discussion that was a good thing to do, I would certainly admit it. It was still, I still was part of the cultural ethos that felt that getting wealthy was a sellout of some kind, or I don't know. Mm-hmm. And so after the Peace Corps, I went back to work at the bar that I met my wife in, and on Long Island, and I got a job offering in Washington, D.C., writing a newsletter that was called African Business and Trade. Now, I knew something about Africa at the time. I knew so little about business and everything associated with business. I literally didn't understand the difference between business and trade. I, I had to actually research it. And even after I researched it, I still wasn't quite sure. I kind of knew trading was trading things, but isn't that kind of business? And how did that all work? And so I took the job, and my boss then was a guy named Leo Welt, who was he was a Jewish war orphan from Germany. His parents died, and he was given up for adoption. And he came to America, and he became very successful selling tractors for, I guess, International Harvester to Russia during the height of the Cold War. And he was just an extraordinary guy. He was just all, I don't want to say all ego, but it was, I don't know what it was. He just was, nothing could stop him. You know, he was a thick, bold guy, smart, but he was just driven to be successful. And I was kind of intrigued. I was intrigued by him, and I liked him because he seemed to like me. Mm-hmm. And one of the early lessons I learned from him was something happened to this Honda that somehow I was driving for the company, and engine seized or something. It turned out the engine seized because I hadn't put oil in it for a year or so, and he told me that I had to get Honda to pay for the new engine, and so he set me on this course of calling and writing people, and that just was impossible. I mean, they knew that it was our fault and it was out of warranty anyway, but he made me, for almost a year, he made me continue to harass these people. And finally, I was on the phone with the vice president of Honda somehow, and still trying to make my case. And of course, I felt like a complete fraud because I felt that we were wrong. But sure enough, they paid for it. And that taught me the power of being relentless, you know, and that Leo could actually, he somehow knew that if we made enough of a pain ourselves, that we would get this thing done. So anyway, that was the first relationship I had with a person that started influencing the way I thought about wealth and the possibility of getting wealth, because he came here with nothing, absolutely nothing, and he became a wealthy person. And so after I worked for him for 4 years, I worked my way up from being the editor of African Business and Trade to being the editor-in-chief of the company. It was a small company. It sold newsletters to mostly Fortune 500 companies that did business in various areas, Russia, Eastern Europe, Africa, and Latin America. And so I was kind of running the company, but it was a company that our newsletters were expensive. They were, I think, $400 a year. They were very technical, and there wasn't a ton of advertising. You would just get in touch with the right people, and they would buy it because we were giving them information that they needed, you know, information about trading opportunities and contacts and so on. And so that was going well enough. We had started a family, and I was making at the time, I think, $30,000 a year. And then I took a trip. We decided to take a trip to Key Largo. My brother-in-law lived there, and he ran a jet ski rental business. And I thought, well, I could, if I go down there and take some job interviews, I might be able to write off the expense as a tax expense tax, which wasn't exactly true because it was vacation, and it would have been true perhaps if I got a job later on. I learned about this, but I did. I took 3 job interviews, 2 with newspapers. I had the fortune when I was working there to have a woman that was moonlighting, doing part-time stuff for us when I was running the place, and she was, believe it or not, the deputy desk editor of the Washington Post's International. She was quite high up, and I guess she needed some extra cash. I don't know. She would write articles for us, and since I didn't realize how much above me, because she was more or less my age, that she was in terms of experience in virtually everything, I would critique in her pieces, and I suppose because I was critiquing her pieces, she got in her head the idea that I was very good at the job that she was doing. I wasn't nearly as good as she was, and so she recommended me to not just to the papers, but to the editors of the Miami Herald and the St. Petersburg Times, which are both in different ways very important, successful newspapers. And so I had those appointments, and then I had been watching this guy that was publishing business newsletters out of Boca Raton, and I sent him a letter too, and I got 3 job interviews. And so a week later, I'm sitting on the beach in Key Largo, watching this kid who worked for my brother, whose sole job in life was to fill up jet skis with gas. And I think that was about his limit of, capacity. He reminded me very much of Sean Penn in Fast Times, Richmond High. He was exactly that stoned and exactly that out of touch. But I had 3 job offers, and I knew I had to take them because I had gone as far as I could in D.C. And in D.C. at that time, there didn't seem to be much opportunity anyway, certainly not in the... And so I decided if there were 2, I would have flipped a coin. Mm-hmm. But since I had 3, I decided I would do something that was more or less the same by asking this Sean Penn character what he thought I should do. And he asked me to, and I described the 2 job offers, the journalism, and particularly in the one in St. Petersburg, I suppose because this woman had written me such a great letter that he actually said to me at one time, well, I know that your ambition is to go as far as you can, and one day after you win a Pulitzer Prize or something, you'll probably try to go somewhere else, but this is why you should stay with us. And he's saying that to me, and I'm thinking, are you crazy? I mean, I can't believe I'm going to get this job. So I explained this to this kid, and basically in my mind there was the Pulitzer Prize hanging in the sky in 2 different clouds, and the third was this guy I interviewed in Boca Raton, who reminded me a little bit of Leo, my first boss, in that he was big and thick and very powerful type of guy, and he was very clear that he was in business to make money, and so I was very much, I didn't have a preference for that at the time because, as I said, I was very mixed in my, I wouldn't admit even to myself that I wanted to make money. But I asked this kid, what should I do? And he took a drag, he kind of looked at the ocean, and he said, Boca, go Boca. And that's really the story. That's how I chose. So I went and I started working for him as head of his direct editorial team, and I was working again with 6 or 8 more mature, more accomplished publishers, and I was doing what I thought was a good job of making sure their essays were, grammatically correct, structured properly, doing the basic writing stuff that I learned in college, and then I had to give a few speeches in that position. So I took what I thought was a Dale Carnegie course on how to give a speech, but I was reading the basic how to win friends and influence people. And that book was really about how to build yourself into success. And each chapter had a different idea associated with it. And the way the course was structured, each week we would read one chapter, and then we would get up on stage and announce to the other students how we were going to manifest this idea. And I think the second or third chapter was about setting goals. And it explained that most people don't achieve anything because they just have no goals and they just kind of wander through life. And I remember he said that if that's your problem, then I'm going to teach you how to set goals. And he said, but some people, a minority of people, run into trouble because they have too many goals that compete with each other. And if you have this problem, you will notice it from this requirement, this test. So the test was to write down 10 things that you would like to be later on in life, that you'd like to accomplish. And that was hard for me. It was when I started writing, I realized what was hard was getting it down to 10. I had so many things I wanted to do that I hadn't realized. I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be you name it. I probably still wanted to be a fireman like I did when I was a kid. And so then once you got your 10, then you had to reduce it to 3. And that was extremely difficult. And it was difficult because I somehow intuited that if this was going to work for me, when I was bringing it down to 3, I was essentially giving up the other 7.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 3 were becoming a writer, which was part of my family's tradition. There were writers in my parents' circle of friends, and my parents were readers, and my father was originally a writer. So being a writer, being a teacher, that was part of our family tradition, and getting rich, somehow that popped up out of all my prior feelings of being poor. And I couldn't make up my mind which of these I was going to talk about to the class, because the rule was that after you picked that one for the rest of the 14 weeks, so the rest 11 or 12 weeks, you had to do nothing in your personal and business life that wasn't directed somehow at that primary goal. And so that was really bothering me, that I was going to give up, one of those things, getting rich, writing, or becoming a teacher. And I didn't decide until I was called up to the lectern to make my little speech. And my thought was, well, hell, go for getting rich, because if you get rich, then you can work, later on you can buy your way into the other 2 things, which is kind of what happened really in my life. And so the next day I went back into work, and I realized immediately that most of what I was doing was a waste of time. Here I was editing these newsletters on robotics, farming, selling tractors and so on, to business leaders, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, or military leaders, or it didn't matter what they were. They were people that were interested in business, and they didn't care. I knew they didn't care about anything I was doing. What they wanted was good information that would help them improve their business. Not only was I doing a mediocre job of that, but I actually was doing it with a kind of leftist slant. Like, I was so like kids out of college today. Mm-hmm. I just was, I was not directly, but indirectly letting them know that I was kind of a lefty, and I didn't even believe in business. I thought business was, basically taking advantage of people. And it just hit me right overnight that this is not what I should be doing. And so I stopped doing all that other things, and I started thinking about what my job is in relationship to what my boss wanted. I knew my boss wanted to grow a big, successful business. His business was just kind of launching then. It was, I don't know, the revenues were several $100,000. And so I thought, boy, what can I do to help him? And I realized that what I could do to help him was to write newsletters that helped his customers make money and help sell subscriptions. And so that's what I started focusing on. And eventually I started learning I recognized that my side of the business was, in every side of the business, there's two sides. There's the people that you spend money on, employees that produce the product, and then there's the people that market and sell the product. The people that produce the product, or you want them to be good, but you want to pay them as little as possible because they're costs. The people that market and sell your products, you want them to be good, and you recognize that they have a skill that they can take elsewhere, so you're going to pay them as much as you have to keep them there. That's where the growth is, the opportunity is as an employee. And so I started learning everything I could about the marketing side and started getting involved in the marketing side. And I would say within 6 months, I was, the most earnest, energetic person concerned with the marketing of our newsletters in the group, because the group Joel had hired a woman whose name was Annette that worked for McGraw-Hill, and she was this kind of a martinet. She had these half-rimmed glasses, and I don't know what she did for McGraw-Hill, but she didn't sell product. I'm sure of that. And she would walk around and kind of bark at you, and she had a very intimidating kind of schoolmarmish way of being. And soon after she saw that I was interested in doing these things, marketing, and she brought me out to lunch with this guy that was the head of IT. Well, it wasn't IT at the time. It was whatever the crude. He was running the giant computer that allowed us to typeset and so on. And they had a lunch about what a jackass my boss Joel was. So I could kind of see what was going on there. It was a political situation. My first introduction to politics in business and how politics are antithetical to good business. And it was an instinct, but I just said to them, listen, I don't feel comfortable talking about this, I'm grateful to have my job, and let's talk about something else. The next day, this woman, Annette, started on a warpath to get rid of me. And her husband happened to work for us as an editor, and she would go to him and ask him to critique anything I had been critiquing with these people. And he would tell her what he thought that I was doing that maybe wasn't right. Now, he was an editor, and he liked the old me. He didn't like the new me, pushing people around and trying to get them to do stuff that was more useful to customers. And so then there were about 4 to 6 interviews I had with Joel. Now, Joel wanted to make a ton of money in this business. He didn't care much about, like product quality or editorial stuff. But he was smart. But he believed that Annette did, because he hired her from a big company. This is another big mistake that entrepreneurs make that I realized is silly. And so he wasn't sure. I was this new kid. He had a sense that I was moving in the right direction. But so I would go into these interrogation where Joel would be there and Annette would be there, and then Joe would start to accuse me of doing whatever it was, but he couldn't quite remember what it was. And then Annette would come in, and then I would just very casually explain what my thought process was. But my thought process was very clear. I was doing the kind of things that Joel thought were important, not necessarily Annette. Mm-hmm. So that went on, I don't know, for 6 months or so. And I continued to move and to develop in my own way, knowing that Annette was, trying to get rid of me. And one day, Joel, this big, powerful guy, walks into my little office and shuts the door behind him. And he looks at me and he says, "I did it. I finally did it." And I said, "What did you do?" And he goes, "I fired her. I fired the bitch." And and then I had this, a bunch of emotions like, thank God, and also like, did I cause this? Should I feel guilty, And also amazement that he too was somehow intimidated by her, that she had this power. So after that day, it was very clear that to Joel and to me that I was there to help build that business. And so we started making a lot of changes, including the products that we were moving towards. And one of the areas we went into was publishing investment newsletters, which he knew a lot about because he had been a broker, or he actually had a seat at the New York Stock Exchange in his early part of his career. So he wanted to go into the investment newsletter business, which was burgeoning at the time. And I knew nothing. I knew as little about investing as I did about business and trade. But since he knew, I followed his instructions about what kind of products we can get into. And we started some products that were I should be ashamed of. Our first product was a digest. And at the time, there were about a dozen other newsletters at the time that were successful, and they were all written by individuals that had very specific knowledge, and they would make recommendations, and so this was a business about recommending stocks and being right, and or about having good ideas about what asset classes you should be in or out of, so. Our first newsletter was a digest of all those 18 guys, where we subscribed to them. We simply wrote a newsletter, what we listed what each of them said according to what the asset class is or what the stock market is going to do. And then our promotion was basically, listen, why spend all this money? Because those newsletters cost $100 a piece. Why spend $1,800 to get 18 different experts when you can get all 18 of them for us for $49 for half price? This made us unwelcome in the community of publishers, but it was very successful. And that began, for me, an opportunity to start moving along as kind of a marketer and thinking about, and a product producer, what kind of other products can we do that would sell well. And then one day, Joel called me in, and he had a review with me, and he gave me an increase in my salary, and it was a substantial increase. It was like 30% of whatever I'm making. And in response, I said, "Joel, thank you very much. I know this is very generous. It's more than, than you would probably normally give anybody else, and blah, 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 but I can't accept it." And he was shocked. He looked by, and he said, "Why?" He goes, "Because I've decided that I want to be rich. It's my number one thing. And this doesn't get me into the trajectory where I need to go to become, a millionaire." And he just kind of looked at me, and he said, "All right, we'll talk about this tomorrow." And the next day, he called me back, and he was completely different. He says, "You know what? I believe in you, and I'm going to give you more, and I'm going to do everything I can to make you rich, which made me feel very good. What he was saying, of course, is I believe that you have the capacity to do what I've done twice already in my life and become wealthy, and I'm going to make you an ally, more or less. And then we started producing newsletters, and then 6 months later, I got the idea of, I started to understand that selling even investment products was not just about selling hopes and dreams or promises of, it was about other things too. It was about what the audience really wanted besides just making money with stocks and bonds and so on. And so I created my own product. It was a club. And I wrote the promotion, and then I wrote the first issue of the product, and I had it all plotted out. And I went to Joel and I said, here it is. This is a new thing. I would like to give this to you. I did it, on the side. I would like to be a partner. And then he said, well, he liked the idea. He said, okay, I'll give you a partner. I'd like to be a partner, 10% partner. I said, great. I wanted more, but I said, I'd take 10. He says, but, it's going to cost you $100,000. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I think this is a really good idea. It's at least $1 million idea. So if you want 10%, you got to pay me $100,000. And I was shocked, I didn't, and that was one of the best lessons I ever learned about money, about business. But he explained that part, the equity part of business, to me. And so I told him, of course, I didn't have $100,000, but he told me that he would allow me to earn it to pay him back off of my 10%. And I don't know how well he thought it would, but this turned out to be a blockbuster promotion. And based even on the 10%, within a year, I had a net worth of almost $1 million. And so from then on, we built the business to revenues of $135 million. And then he had a heart attack, and he wanted to close the business. I asked him to leave it open for a while by giving portions of it to other people, and we could stay on as kind of a board. And he finally agreed to that, and the business continued to prosper for a while. And then, we kind of, I don't remember exactly what happened, but I think we just ran it out until to its natural end, since we weren't reinvesting in the business. And then I retired. I was 39. I retired. I thought I was rich. By that time, I had accumulated a net worth of $10 million. And so I spent a year in retirement in which I wrote poetry and short stories and tried to get them published. And but to do that, I had already developed a lot of other hobbies. And I had a full-time assistant. And as the year went by, I realized that, first of all, I realized my income for the first year was, I think it was either $120 or $820. It was something like that. Like, this was money for winning prizes in short story contests, Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I said, how much am I spending? I asked my assistant, and I don't know what it was, but I was spending like $600,000+ a year on my lifestyle. And I thought, well, this is not going to work. So I said, all right. We figured I could probably make out with my net worth earning, like if I was spending only $250,000 a year. And I thought, geez, that's a ton of money back then. That should be easy. So I said, all right, bring in all of my expenses, and we're going to just chop them down to I can just do the $250 and I'll be able to keep my house. And so her first thing was my collection of vintage cars. And because I was spending money storing them, spending money keeping them up, and I was like, well, That's not expense. That's an investment. Yeah, we're spending money on it, but one day it'll be worth much more. No, but give me the next. The next one was the burgeoning collection of art. No, for the same reason we can't cut that. Blah blah blah. And so we went at the end of that conference. We went from cutting my budget to whatever it was. Let's say it was $600,000 to $585,000 a year. And then I thought, okay, maybe I ought to look for a job. And so I contacted my current partner who had a business in Baltimore, and we knew each other because that first big success I had writing that newsletter was so successful that he actually created kind of a knockoff product that was like it, and he sent it out in the mail, and I saw it, and but I knew since he didn't write the product, he didn't really quite get it. All the outside was right, but the inside was wrong. So I took his package. Everything was direct mail packages at the time, and I put a little Post-it note on top of it, and I said, Bill was his name. I said, this won't work. You don't know why, but I do. And I said, it won't work, and I sent that to him, and it didn't work, and I think that he kept that in mind. And we had sold him one of our businesses that today is still a $100 million business, and that was that business, the business I started, and so I went over to his. I thought I would earn some extra money writing, and he gave me an opportunity to write one of his products. And so we interviewed, and by the end of the interview was constantly being interrupted by people coming up and asking him questions about the business. His business was much smaller than mine was. His business was like $8 million revenue business at the time, and he was doing everything himself. And these were questions about marketing or operations and stuff that he was not at all interested in. So I would keep answering these questions of people because I was familiar with the. And so by the end of the interview, basically, he offered me a job, and since I didn't want the job, I insisted on a deal which made me basically a partner. Mm-hmm. And then, so there I found myself commuting to Baltimore, and the business was $8 million. And the first thing we did was put into place what's very common now, which is called the back end, which is where you sell your subscriber something that's similar but at a higher level for a lot more money, and that brought us that and a promotion that was written at the time that was that did very well, brought us from 8 to 25 million, and then over the next number of years, 3 or 4 years, bringing into the business stuff I had learned from my prior mentor, we brought it up to about $100 million. And the profits were good. We were making, we were making maybe 12%. And so it was, good enough. I was a minor partner in the business, but the deal I had made is that the cash that we gave ourselves would be the same every year. And so he was happy because he didn't spend any money, but I was spending more money. I realized that one year when I asked him what he had gotten his wife for Christmas and what she had gotten him, and she had gotten him a hat, and he had gotten her like scarves or something like that. I was like, oh boy, I'm in trouble, because he was deciding how much money we're taking of the profits, and that continued. I mean, we during that business, I don't think there was a year where except 1 year where we were forced to, that we took more than 10 or 15% of the profits. We reinvested the rest of it, which was good in a way, but bad in a way. It was good that we were stockpiling cash. It was bad that we were spending money. We had so much money to spend, and we were spending money on projects that were not smart, or an overspending for operational stuff we didn't need. And so we got it up to about 100 million, and then we just couldn't, for a couple of years, we just couldn't get it to go beyond that. And meanwhile, I should say, since you're asking about my whole experience, in the prior 10 years, as I was once I started making money, even in Florida, I started investing in mostly in real estate. I just had an inkling that real estate, local real estate, in my neighborhood, I could kind of figure out what was going on. And then I started saving money and so on, and I started tracking, which I think was very important. I started tracking I started tracking my net worth, because I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, a high school friend who happened to live in Florida nearby me. He was a real estate attorney, and I was buying my first house for $175,000. And I asked him if he thought that I was going, above my means. And at that time, that year I had netted like $800,000 or something, $900,000. And I was taking out a mortgage on the house. And he said, Mark, you're probably the most conservative person that lives in Boca Raton. All these guys in fancy houses, these doctors and lawyers, they're not making as much money as you. So don't worry about it. So I maintained that fear, I think, my whole life of getting poor again. And so I was okay with that, the taking out only 10% profits, although today I would definitely not have done it. I would have been taking out 30 or 35%, because a lot of that money just went away we were frivolous, we spent it on business ideas, but ideas that were either too expensive or nonsensical. But the business grew to about 100 million, and then my partner decided that he wanted to move and live in France. And then I thought, oh boy, what can we do? And since I already had the experience with my former partner of breaking the business up into pieces and seeing that I think at that time we broke them up into 7 pieces, and seeing that those 4 or 5 of those 7 pieces continued to do well, some of which we sold later on, one of which was to my current partner. I suggested that we do the same thing there, that we since he was leaving, that we take our business and break it into, I guess, 6 parts, and we put our best person in charge of each. And then the other idea that I had was that we were going to keep control of the cash, which I knew we had to do, and we were going to keep control of the accounting. We had to protect ourselves. We were going to have some control over legal to make sure people didn't do crazy things. But then the other thing is I wanted all the marketing to be common. All the marketing results I wanted everybody to see. There was a lot of, as soon as you did that, and as soon as you do that, you're going to get a lot of competitiveness. And I had already learned long before there that an industry goes, and your industry grows when you're sharing knowledge, not when you're hoarding it. And I always felt like, if you tell me a secret and I tell you a secret, and they're both good secrets, I'm going to make as much or more money than you are, and I'm happy to do it. We'll both get richer together. I never believed in this fixed pie that you could expand it. And so that's basically what we did, and we had this report that showed what everybody was doing, and everybody could see exactly how the ad campaigns that the other people were using, and the ideas that were working, and that broke us out of the $100 million mark, and we grew to around $350 million, and our profit margins were considerably higher then too. Although when we made the decision, I said, even if we don't get bigger, we could just focus on more quality and go from 112% to 120%, and that would be good enough for us. But the opposite happened. So then we got to 350, and that's when I wrote the book. I was then making enough money that I could start writing. And I got a contract with John Wiley to write a couple of books, one of which was Ready, Fire, Aim, which is about how to build your business from nothing. And that's where I kind of laid out how I saw that entrepreneurship works and building businesses work. That was my special interest, taking a business from 0 to 1 million, then from 1 million to 10, then 10 to 50 or so, and then beyond that to where we were. And yeah, the business just grew, and it didn't stop at 350 million. It continued, and we had one of our divisions actually move over later on, became a public company, but it just kept growing and growing, and until at its height, our sales from one year was over $1.5 billion. So since I had a share in the profit of the business, I went from having a net worth of 10 million to a net worth that was many times higher than that. But meanwhile, I was still doing all my real estate stuff, and I was doing other things too. I would do some investing, but I never really, even though we had so many publications about investing, I never really was too interested in it. I don't know why. There's something about it that just didn't seem so interesting to me. But I had, I put my money in conservative stocks, and I found out about index funds and so on, and more into real estate. And then I started making deals, private deals with starting up little startup companies. And my idea was that I wanted to make sure that I had like multiple income streams, like 5 or 6 income streams that eventually would each produce enough cash every year for me to pay for my lifestyle, so that if 1 or 2 or 3 of them went bad, I still had. And that's really what I did over the next 10 years or so. There were a lot of lessons that I learned there, important lessons about sharing, about not trying to run everything yourself, about how to invest and when to invest and what not to invest in. And I got to a point where I remember I was walking over a bridge in Italy, and I realized that my net worth was such that I never had to worry. I had more money than my grandkids would need, and furthermore, since I had multiple streams of income, if my main business collapsed the next day, I would be fine. I still had income from other places. I've spent all these years now, it must have been 20 years or so, where my primary objective was to get wealthier and wealthier. And I never, it was becoming kind of a habit. And I remember when my second partner, Joel, he was dying of cancer. And I visited him in the hospital once, and this is a sweet moment for me. It may sound differently, but he called me over and he whispered into my ear, and I thought he was going to give me some advice about life, but he said, he goes, "Mark, don't forget about the $800,000 that so-and-so owes us. Make sure you get that, And then I thought, wow, this is habit forming, and even admit you get to the point where all you're doing is it's like a game. You're just trying to get richer and richer. And so at that point, I totally revamped my whole goal structure in life, and I made increasing my wealth like number 10 on the list. And then I started writing the books. I started writing about stuff I knew, i.e. teaching people, doing seminars, and I just started sharing what I knew. And my businesses didn't evaporate. They continued to do well because they were run by very competent people. And and then I was able to get to a point where not only was I, in the top 1% of the top 1%, but I had fully recognized that I didn't need it anymore, and I didn't want any of that stuff anymore. So I tried to retire a couple of times. I retired once when I was 39. That's when I realized 10 million was enough. When I was 49, I retired again with plenty enough, but I missed being in business, and I went back again, and then again when I was 59. And I finally came, but by that time, the business I was doing, I was writing and teaching, and I was more on that side of the publishing business. And so I enjoyed what I was doing, and so I decided to keep doing it. And luckily I hadn't like destroyed my family, because I paid just enough attention to keep everybody together. And I was able then to do the things that you're supposed to do in the beginning, like, put your family first and then your business second. And and so since then I've continued to work 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day. But I just, the difference is now I would say that at least half of those hours are for my nonprofit projects, not for businesses. I continue to work in business for the businesses where I think people want me to help them, and I think I can be useful. But I'm perfectly happy to retire from any of them anytime they recognize that they don't need me anymore, which has happened a couple of times. And so, yeah, that's kind of the story. I learned a lot of lessons along the way about business, about my business specifically, but about business generally. I learned not to be ashamed of making money. In fact, I learned that, paying your expenses, your own expenses, the expenses of your family and the people you bring into the world is your like a primary responsibility. It's not secondary like you used to think. And I learned a lot about how in business you'll do better if you work on expanding the general pie for your competitors. And so my whole thing about business always was to try to give more than I get.
So you shared your story. You shared the path that took you from childhood all the way to building your wealth and ultimately working with all of these different businesses. But one thing that I think you might have overlooked, or at least glossed over, was the scope of how many businesses you've actually started or run. Because, I follow a lot of contemporary, like, entrepreneurial gurus, and they all cite Ready, Fire, Aim as the definitive book on entrepreneurship. And that book sort of goes into, or at least touches on, how many businesses you've actually started. So how many businesses have you actually helped start?
No. Of course, the answer is I don't know. And I'm sure there's a qualified psychiatrist that can explain it to you. It's some version of attention deficit disorder. For me, things that are new to me are always like fascinating in a way that things that I know are not. So what can I tell you to give you an idea? I mean, I'm just going to go off the top of my head. If you name something, I could probably say I did that too. So I've just mentioned a few things like real estate. But I have sold I have sold jewelry. I've sold watches. I have sold TVs. There's a period of my life where I was selling 30,000 TVs a month. I have sold all kinds of services. I've sold a newspaper. Well, that's kind of the same thing. These are all businesses I owned. I sold, of course, I was an art dealer for 20 plus years. You would almost have to ask me. I've been in the restaurant business. I've been in the fitness business. I think you would have to ask me a business I haven't been in. So why have I been in all these crazy businesses? Because, my basic mode, I've come to understand this later in my life, is like you know how they say that you don't want to hang out with a yes person because they're always just saying yes? I'm a yes person. Anytime anybody makes a halfway decent proposal to me, I say yes. And I think I say yes because it's exciting, and I figure how big can it go? Let me give this a shot. I'm not stupid. I'm not going to make any. It's 50-50. Half of it is I say yes to almost everything. The other half is this Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger thing is I try when I'm doing that not to do anything really stupid, So yeah, I've been in, sold leather goods, sold franchises, I sold health, all kinds of health products, supplements. I sold services. I helped somebody start a successful business in pelvic floor disorder therapy. So that's why I think I did it, because anytime somebody would ask for help, I always said yes, and eventually I started to connect the dots. And Ready Fire Aim was a project. It was going to be one of the times I retired. I was going to do one conference where I was going to charge what was then a lot of money, $10,000 or something, to talk about business and success and wealth building. But we got so many different people from different industries to respond that I thought, oh boy, how am I going to handle this? And I actually talked to Rich Sheffrin, who's a mutual friend of ours. Mm-hmm. And somehow he got me to thinking, Mark, you've been in all these businesses, there's some commonalities. And so that was the basis of the book. I started, when you're beginning, what is the same challenge that everybody faces? What is the same opportunity that everybody faces? And that's how I built a book. And I think that's what makes the book work, and why it's been so appreciated is because I'm talking about just the core essentials of how to take a business from zero to whatever number you want, really. So, I've mentioned like probably 6 or 8 different businesses, but I've been in the dancing business, martial arts business. Just name a business, I've probably been in it.
Genetics research.
No, I haven't done that.
Damn.
You got me. First try, you got me.
Well, so I have some follow-up questions. Oh.
I have built a large family tree. I've devoted many years and built a family tree for my family and my wife. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't call it a business because it probably cost me $200,000 and I've never made a nickel. In fact, I don't think any of my nieces or nephews or my wife's families ever looked at it, but we do have a nice documentation of our genetic heritage or ancestry.
Nice.
So,
very good.
It's what you can do when you can afford it.
It's one of the reasons why I imagine people watch content like this is because they want to arrive at the point where if they get an idea like doing something like that, they can afford to do it without feeling any guilt or feeling any, how should I say, anything tethering them to obligation. Right. I imagine a lot of people want to start business and grow business because they have that desire for more money.
Yeah, that's a good point. It reminds me of a rule I have. I've also been in the craft brewery business. You just reminded me. Mm-hmm. And generally, my rule is if you want to start a business, the best way to start a business and be successful is to start a business that competes with the business you've worked for 20 years, that you not just work for, that you're the top marketing guy for it, because now you know exactly how the business works. You know how to attract customers. You know the contacts. You have a good reputation in the industry. That's the 80+% likelihood scenario. The worst thing to do is to start a business that you think would be great to have, that you know nothing about. And even if you're smart and hardworking and persistent, you have all the right qualities, if you try to start a business that you really don't know anything about, the chances of you failing are more than 80%, probably more than 90%. So I have this thing with my good friends that come up with ideas about investing businesses, is I have an amount of money that I will invest. If you came to me and said, Mark, I want to do this business, and I thought to myself, well, Sean's very smart, he's very capable, but he doesn't know anything about this business. It's quite different from the business we're doing now. Then I will write you a check, and it will be a good check. It'll make you feel happy. But when I give it to you, and this is what I do, I say, I'm giving you this amount because this is the amount I give my friends when I'm 100% sure you're going to fail. And this is what I did in the craft brewery business. And sure enough, I proved myself right. You know, in every business, there are secrets, and then there are the core secrets. And the secrets are everything that you read about in books and everything people talk about. The core secrets are the things that shouldn't be true about the business but are true, and people don't like to talk about. And the people that especially don't like to talk about it are the people that have been successful in that business. And so they tend to talk about all the things that sound good. You know, I paid attention to my employees. I always put customers at first. I did this and I did that. And that's what you read about, and that's what business, that's what Harvard and all the Wharton and all those guys focus on. But when it comes to entrepreneurship, what that will do is it will get you, it will allow you to, you know, to run out of money in however much money you've gotten, but it won't. It's a surefire way of failure. So, you know, that's one of the things I keep in mind. And one of the rules that I made for myself and the businesses I'm involved in that you know very well, I call it one step removed. And that is when somebody's in your business or they come up with an idea, it's kind of like what you're doing now, but it's a little bit different. I say to myself, I ask them, how many steps removed is it from our business? So there are many aspects of business that you would need to consider, like the media. Where do you advertise for the business? The product. Is it a service product? Is it a product? What are the costs of the average? Where is the industry that you're moving into? What are the 5 or 6 key aspects of that industry and that the successful businesses that are in that business, and how much do you know about them? And if you don't know if you know everything but one, your chances of success are more than 60%. Good bet, worth investing in. I didn't say 90, I said more than 60. If there are 2 things you don't understand, your chances of success probably drop down to 30. And if there's 3 of, let's say, 6 or 8, your chances drop down to about 2%. So this is, to me, a key rule. And that's why I try to caution people that if you really want to be in a particular industry, you got to know that business from the inside out. You'll never, even my own book, which I think is the best book written on entrepreneurship, I'm talking about the core elements that you face, the core challenges and so on. It's still kind of abstract, it's not, I don't know what they are for any individual business. An example I give is a lot of successful people I know, men I know, they want to be in the bar business because they had a great time when they were kids being in the bar business. So they think, this may not be true anymore, but it used to be true. When I was in the bar business, they would start bars and they would hire very attractive young women to be the bartenders. Because one thing they did know about the business is that in bars, 80% of your revenue comes from the men, not from the women. So they thought, well, to bring in the men, hire, and sure enough, that's what they did. But what they didn't know is that when you have a pretty bartender and you have 12 or 20 guys sitting at the bar talking to her, and half of these guys are fat and their pants, their belt level is below the crack of their ass, when a woman walks in, she goes, I don't want to be here. And so that's like the death. And during my time in the bar business, everybody wanted to start young person's bars, and almost everybody failed except the businesses that were started the way we did by accident, where the people behind the bar were young men. Mm-hmm. And so if you have young men behind the bar, then women feel comfortable coming in because they befriend the bartenders. They don't feel like they're getting hit on all the time, and it's a comfortable experience. And then when a guy walks in, he sees all these women behind the bar, and then the whole place works. So that's kind of a crude example, but it's nobody's going to, if somebody had a very successful, bar business, they wouldn't tell you that story. Mm-hmm. Because it just doesn't. You'd much rather say something that the audience wants to hear. I always treat my people fairly. I pay them more. I give them incentives and all the stuff you hear. Yeah. But the real secret, I believe, of every business is not the obvious stuff, the stuff you can read in books. It's the stuff that you learn when you're there.
Right. And do you feel that those core secrets change not only depending upon the business, but also depending upon geography and like the certain niches or markets that you're trying to cater to?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is totally. At some level, like at the level that I wrote that book at, I think the challenges of every stage of business, going from 0 to a million, million to 10, 10 to 50, 50 to whatever, 300 million to a billion, those more or less are the same, because there you're really describing the dynamics of capital, cash flow, market fluctuations. You're talking about what is common about basic economics in any place. But the specifics, when you're talking about what are the secrets, you're right, they're location specific, they're age specific, they're everything specific, which is, again, another reason why if you're going to knock off a business, you want to knock off a business that you know very well, that you've been on the inside. Mm-hmm. When I wrote my first very successful financial information product, by then I had written at least a dozen very successful promotions for financial newsletters. So I already knew the inside. I knew that I already felt I was one of the best copywriters in the business. Mm-hmm. But I always suspected there was something else, that I was working at a kind of a superficial level of that everybody just, the main motivation is just people wanted to make more money, Mm-hmm. But I knew that we were selling to people that were older than me, my father's generation. Yeah. And I could tell by the news and reading the news and just being aware of that generation, there was something else that they wanted that was different, that was emotional, that was about, affirmation and affirming your value. That generation of people, this was a great generation. They did everything for everybody. But at that time, this was in the late 70s and early 80s, they were the forgotten generation. Nobody gave them credit for anything. Yeah. They had given everything. So the promotion I wrote was about that. That's what I was giving them. I was inviting them to belong to a group where people validated them, not the stuff about promising money wasn't. And that's what I think made it such a good success. And that's why, even oddly today, 30 plus years later, it's still a very successful business. And even if the people that are running it don't understand it, it's structured in a way that. So yeah, I think absolutely the details change. The larger picture stuff I talk about, early to rise, one of the points I make is if you're in a brand new startup, that your main problem, is you have to figure out how to sell a new customer a product at an allowable acquisition rate before you run out of money and time. You're bankrolling your own business, and you got to really work hard and focus on that. Most people focus 20% of the time on that and 80% of the time on getting an office, getting a brand, doing all this other crap that doesn't mean anything. What you need to find out is my core idea, can I sell this product profitably? And how exactly do they do that? You have to find that out. I call this the optimal selling strategy. You have to find that out as soon as you possibly can and do whatever you can to figure that out. So at every stage, that's one part of what I try to explain in stage one. If you decide you're going to be in the cookie business, chocolate chip cookie business, like probably 240 people in the million people in the world think they want to be, and because they think their chocolate chip cookies are better. Well, you got to first of all start out by going to a local mart and finding out if people like your cookies, if they like them, how much they're willing to pay for them, will they buy more, what kind of pitch do you got to use to sell them. You've got to really figure all those things out before you even get into that very, very competitive world. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but
you did. I mean, you talked about some interesting things along the way. One of the things that you sort of touched on is something that I want to sort of come back to and sort of like rein us back to how you first started building your fortune, because you started talking about a copywriting idea. And throughout this process, you've been talking about selling different things. When I asked you about business, you talked about I've sold this, I've sold this, I've sold this. And selling is just one of many facets of business. And one of the things that strikes me, not only in this conversation, but in knowing you for the past 10 years or so, is that I feel like there was a set of things you did that got you rich initially, but what got you wealthy was doing something else. What got you rich, if I may say so, was writing copy, product creation, marketing, finding good partners to go in on info products with, and then physical products as well, and then effectively marketing and selling those to people. And that got you rich initially. But that got you from A to B. You're at Z. How'd you get to Z?
Well, I don't think I'm at Z. I think our Lord.
Okay, you're at R. If we're going to quote Virginia Woolf,
Lord and Savior Elon Musk is at Z, but
right.
Let's put me at E or F. Well, I think that's a good observation for sure. That whether you're developing a business or you are working for a business and your wealth increases and you're trying to increase it further, you have to develop different skills. You mentioned that first set of skills. There's something I learned from Joel even before then, and from Leo. I mentioned them, those two things, and that is that. But I would say the two first core things are personality traits that you have to develop, even if you don't have them. And I did not have them at all. You have to be brave about selling. You have to be willing to sell and sell hard. One, for most people that's almost impossible. But you can learn how to do this. Two, you have to be unbelievably persistent, like Leo was in insisting I get the refund I get the payment from the Honda.
Yeah.
You have to be willing just to go at it. Every problem that you come up with, when you sense that you're on the right track. And this is what I used to visualize. It was an obstacle that all the people in the world, the invisible people in the world that were trying to do what I was doing, had come up upon and stopped. Said, I can't get over this, I can't get around it. You have to just tell yourself that whatever this is, there's a way around it. And I'm not going to stop now, I'm going to get around it. You have to develop that kind of, I'm going to say something later that refines that a little bit, because if that's all you do, you can get yourself in trouble. But that persistence, you have to develop that persistence. You have to. So first is you have to learn to like selling, be comfortable with selling. You have to have that persistence. But, excuse me. The third thing that you have to do, and this is what I learned from my second mentor, Joel, is, and this sounds very crude, you have to know where the quick and easy money is in any business. Now, the quick and easy money, if that's all you do in business, you're going to burn out every business you start. But if you don't know where the quick and easy money is, that's the stream. If you don't know where it is, then you're going to run into problems way too early. For a business in stage one to exist, you need cash flow. You can't just keep taking money from your investors. You need cash flow to pay for the business. And to do that, you have to have an instinct about what projects or products that you're going to launch will bring in a good amount of money right away. And that is an instinct that Joel had. I mean, he basically coached me on it. I had 10,000 ideas, and he would tell me, no, that we're going to try. So I would say those three things are what you need to develop in the beginning if you have any chance of really being, not just having success in the first place, but being a serial entrepreneur, somebody that can keep being successful. Then the second stage, I would say, is all the things that you talked about, the fundamentals of starting up a business and getting, good people. Then I would say, the third stage beyond what you said is the stage of, maybe we could call it partnership or something, that you recognize that if you are going to be in charge of everything in your business, it will only grow as big as you are. Your capacity is your intellectual capacity, your emotional capacity, your ingenuity. And I've seen this happen many times in business. And this happens, by the way, which is interesting, in some of the brightest, the brightest people I've mentored, people with the most talent. They often are stymied by this. They won't allow the business to grow beyond them because they want to control everything about the business. And that's okay, if you're willing to have a $10 million business limit or $100 million, whatever the industry's limit is, that's fine. And you can be the one genius, but you'll never really go beyond that. To go beyond that, you have to be willing to partner up with people that have, talents and skills and habits and drives that you don't have. And that's a whole different skill, because that's really the skill of, it's not merely the skill of identifying people that are super smart or super good at this or that, then you're not good. And a lot of these I don't know what to call them, but the popular advice that is out there on entrepreneurship says, well, if you're not a copywriter, just hire a copywriter. If you're not this marketer, you just hire a marketer. If you're not this, no, you can't do that. You have to make a business, to make your empire grow beyond that, you have to develop a whole separate skills of partnering. And to me, this is the key to go from being, a regular person that has wealth somebody with a net worth of $10 million, let's say, to having a net worth of $100 million or $1 billion. You have to have the instinct to partner, to get into joint venture relationships or businesses that you even control or whatever, where somebody else that has different overlapping and different skill sets and tendencies than you can be your partner. And a key component of that, I would say the most important component of that, and nobody talks about this, is you have to find out what that person's perception of fairness is. Because you're moving, when in the early stages, when you're doing everything yourself, your decisions tend to be transactional. You're making deals with people that are one-time deals. You're doing a marketing deal on this, or you're hiring a person to do this, which you can later cancel. But if you want to build your business beyond you have to create a relationship that's going to last almost indefinitely. And the obvious component there is you have to find somebody that you think, gee, this guy could really help me build a business. But those, and I've been in those relationships, those are good for 2 or 3 years, and they dissolve always. There's always a problem with that. And the problem always arises from the natural instinct of your partner to think that he's more valuable to the business than you do. It's a natural instinct of all of us as humans. We tend to overestimate our own value and underestimate our partner's value. So you have to have a screen where you eliminate possible partners that have different concepts of fairness. And I learned one of the greatest ways of doing this is you can't do it the way my second mentor did it, which was to negotiate very tough and make sure you're taken care of. Because if you do that, there's all kinds of bad things that happen from that. But what you never get is a long-term lifetime partner from that. What you need to find is somebody whose sense of fairness in business and in life overlaps yours. And if you find that person, then you can develop a relationship that will last for life. Somebody that's not constantly comparing, constantly worrying about whether everything is exactly the same. Somebody that says, you're my partner, I'm your partner, we're in this together for the long run. I trust you, you trust me, let's make it work. And there's the only way I know to do this, I learned from my third mentor and partner, my current one, is when I realized that I came to his business when it was a small business and we built it into a very big business. But there were so many things he did different from me, and one of them was negotiating. When anybody came to him trying to negotiate a deal, I was all ready to do my hardcore negotiation with him. I knew how to do it, and I knew I could get a good deal. But since he was the senior partner, I deferred to him, and I noticed that his technique was very simple. He would listen to what the pitch was, and then he would ask the other person, what do you think a fair deal would be? And then the person would say, and then he would say one of two things. He would say either, I think I could work with that, or, that sounds reasonable, or he would say, oh, I don't think I could afford that. And to me, I didn't understand it at first. I'm like, there's so much negotiating that can go on between. But then I realized the genius of it. Because he wasn't looking for a transaction. He was looking for a relationship. Mm-hmm. And when he said, I think I can go with that, what he meant is, you may be asking too much, but I think the potential of our relationship is great enough that what you're asking is something that will ultimately prove to be within a range of fairness. Fairness is never a point. It's a range, and this is something I learned over and over again. So, but if his position was outside of your range of fairness, then that's a person you will always have problems with. And if somebody said, and I saw this happen many times, if he said, oh, I couldn't afford it, then the other person would naturally like try to continue the deal and do this and do that. That was the end for him. He would politely disengage. He would never do business with that person again. And that, to me, was brilliant. He saved himself so much agita, so much complication, so much trouble, because he realized that however great this person is, the relationship itself was going to be, I don't want to say toxic, but it was going to be more difficult than it probably would be worth. So that's the stage that you get into when you're at that level. You have to partner. You have to be, whether even it's the people that were within your company, that your employees, you have to arrange relationships with them that allow them to become wealthy with you, and in a way where you're always celebrating the same things. Your goals and your rewards are aligned, and it's not easy to do that. I mean, it's complicated, but you have to accept that. You can't. I'm sure there are examples of people that just bully their way through business and did great, but I mean, the cost of doing that emotionally is something that I could never, ever endure. So, so I recommend doing it the way I've described right now, that you recognize you're at a point where your business has grown as big as it could be based on your own genius. It's at 200 or 300 million. You want to get to $1 billion. You got to look elsewhere. You're not going to do it with the same team. They've been doing it for 3 or 4 years. Everybody's good. Everybody's trying. That's where you're stuck. You need to have new relationships with people you can trust, and they can trust you.
Nice. Good. We're looking good. Sort of on a similar note, I want to, again, go back to something that you were talking about. You talked about visualizing obstacles. What is the role that, I guess, manifestation or visualizing success has had over the course of your career? And you can go very woo-woo with this, but I also think that there's a practical application to this.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of gurus that sell this idea of visualization, and I'm sure that visualization is an effective psychological tool for athletes and for many situations. All I can tell you is that I use visualization, but not for accomplishing goals. I personally, it just doesn't feel like it makes any sense to me. Emotionally, it feels wrong. And, like put up the photo of the car that you want to buy and all that stuff. I never believed in it, and I never did it. And I could talk about why later, but what I do with visualization is what I talked to you about. I try to, when I run into problems that emotionally I want to run away from, I try to find some way to visualize me getting beyond this problem. And not just that, but how I'm going to feel afterwards, whether it works or it doesn't. This is a bit of a Zen thing, but it's helped me enormously. So you go into a deal, whether it's internally or with a partner or whatever, and you're kind of excited about it. And the easiest thing in the world is to imagine how much money you're going to make and how great it's going to be and how much credit you're going to get for it. I don't think people need a lot of help for that. You don't need to be putting up photos on your refrigerator to make that happen. What you need to do, I think, is more of a Zen thing. You need to imagine the obstacles on the way, the failures, and ultimately the ultimate failure. And you have to not just imagine, and this I do intentionally and visually. I imagine the failures and the obstacles, and then I imagine what I do when somebody comes to me and said, "This is the marketing report. This bombed. This idea bombed." I imagine how I'm going to react to it emotionally, which is very, very important, and what I'm going to say about it. And that's where I spend all my visualization, visualizing failures, visualizing not succeeding. And the way I talk about it is making friends with your devil, your fear. And the great thing about doing that is that what you're doing is you're preparing to move forward the moment that you run into an obstacle or the moment that you fail. You already have, most importantly, you already have an emotion that isn't self-defeating, you're not crushed by it. You've already figured out. And I actually literally imagine myself feeling this way. Mm-hmm. And this has helped me enormously in my life. I actually learned this, oddly enough, through my personal relationship with my wife. When we were early in our marriage, I would always fixate on anything we decided to do, whether it was going to a movie or a dinner or a party or whatever. Like, as soon as we decided to do it, I would oh, this is going to be great. And then she had a tendency of, at the last moment, saying, nah, I don't want to do that. And that would infuriate me. It would make me crazy. And I realized that at some point that I wasn't going to change her from doing that. That was her nature. So what I started to do is, as soon as she told me that, and she told me we're going to do this party, let's say, I imagined her coming up to me 2 hours before and saying, nah, I don't want to go to the party. And then I literally imagined what I would be doing at the next moment. Like this book I wanted to read, something I wanted to watch on TV, whatever it was, I would visually, concretely imagine that, and I would start to enjoy that. So this is actually true. So, and this is how I train myself. Generally, now, when things don't happen, I'm perfectly fine with it because I already have something that I want to do already in my mind because this thing didn't work out. And I think that's a very important mindset that all business builders need to develop because things do not always go your way. And you don't want to be stymied. You don't want to think you're a failure just because one project didn't go wrong. You want to be the person that, like my... There's another example. When I came to work with my current partner, I had an idea I was sure would work, and it failed. And it cost the company $86,000. I actually wrote him a check for $86,000, even though it was a company thing, because I felt so guilty. I don't think he took it. I don't remember. But then like a month or two later, he had an idea he was sure would work, and it lost like $800,000. And then I was kind of waiting for him to be humbled, embarrassed. But this is what he did. He goes, well, I guess that didn't work. And then he just continued the conversation. I was like, that's amazing. Like, he just threw off all that guilt, all that self-recrimination because he's humble. It's actually a quality of humility that he had a great idea that he was excited about, but he wasn't sure this was, that this was ordained by the spirits above. So, so I think that's when you get to that stage, you have to develop those kind of skills that allow you to build relationships with people that can expand your business beyond where your business is now.
Mm-hmm. If you look back on your whole career, building wealth, building so many businesses, and doing so many things, what do you regret? What do you look back on and say, I wish I hadn't done that?
Such a common question that always provokes such common cliches responses. I'm going to try to say something that's not, but I'm saying it. How can I regret anything? Mm-hmm. I'm 73. I'm very healthy. I have more friends than I can possibly count. I'm wealthy. My family is fantastic. I have grandchildren. How can I regret anything? It's all part of a process that got me here. But There's obviously things that I have learned along the way that I can tell people. For example, on the question we were just talking about, I can tell people don't get emotionally connected to whatever it is you're doing in business. You need to operate with intentionality. This is actually an existentialist idea, and also a Zen idea. You need to intend to make this thing work, but you need to emotionally detach from it working. Because if you don't, then it destroys your energy, your ego, and everything else when it fails. So all the times that I didn't do that, I could say I regret. But I learned, so I don't regret them. They were common mistakes made by, younger people and experienced people. I can't say this, that I do regret. I read a great essay by one of my favorite writers, whose name I forget, and he made a speech at college about what he regrets, and he said, the things that I most regret in life was when I was unnecessarily unkind to people.
George Saunders.
That's who it was, right? Yeah. And of course, I have all those regrets. Whenever I did that, you do that when you're like filled with your own ego and it's a cheap shot. And of course, I regret all those. It's totally unnecessary. You don't have to be an asshole to be successful in business. It's one way to run a business, but you can learn not to be an asshole and still be very firm and make your decision properly. And there are, if you force me to, I could probably come up with a few of those things that I regret. But another thing that I would say that's in this general area is like being afraid to let somebody go when you realize that they're not working. Holding on too long. You're loyal to the person, you like them, you want to make it work, but they clearly don't have a future in the organization. And I've learned that it's better to just do it sooner rather than later. It doesn't help them and it doesn't help you. And the phrase I use is, I've never talked to an executive that ever said to me, I wish I had waited longer to fire that person. It just, when you have that instinct that this person's got to go, even if you don't have a backup, that's what usually stalls you, because you don't have a backup. The reason you don't have a backup is because that person's still working, and you know that he's still working. But the moment you decide to let him go, the backup just almost miraculously appears. I've never had a situation in all my years of firing hundreds of people, which is always unpleasant, where the person that replaced them wasn't better, even just a little bit better. Maybe I have, but I can't remember it. But overwhelmingly, they're better. So that's got to tell you something. When you have the instinct that this isn't working out, just do it and do it quickly. You won't regret it.
That's really good advice. If you could go back and do anything differently, would you?
Would I do anything differently? Well, to me, it's a bit of the same question. There were a lot of conversations I had with people where I was kind of harsh.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to be. You're harsh because you're weak and scared. Yeah. And you're afraid. I knew I had to say something hard and make a hard decision. But I was afraid, how do I put it? I was afraid I wouldn't have the courage to do it. And then the lesson wouldn't be learned, the problem would be repeated, the person that should be gone would stay. Mm-hmm. And so because I was afraid of that, I tended to be harsh. If I was stronger internally, I could have done the same thing, but in a softer way without, hurting the person's feelings as much. So that's a skill in and of itself. I do not think that that's a skill that's necessary to create great wealth. You know, if you took the top 100 entrepreneurial wealth builders in the world, I'm sure 70 of them were complete jackasses and assholes, and but some of them weren't. The fact that some of them managed to do it without it tells me that, yeah, if I was smarter and better and less secure, less insecure, that I could have been a little bit, I could have made the same decision, but done it in a little bit of a better way.
Yeah.
But yeah, did you have other thoughts in mind? And
No. I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I've noticed in not only talking to other millionaires and also listening to interviews with millionaires and billionaires is that they tend to say a lot of the same things that you just said. And one of the things that I really admire is that all of them reflect upon their life, the successes and the mistakes that they've made, and say it was all part of the necessary preconditions that led me to this moment that I really appreciate. And I could not have gotten here if not for all the good and all the bad. And so I don't feel bad about the bad.
Right. Yeah. Well, none of us are born complete and perfect. And I would say this, that when you're talking to people that have made a great success, whatever their weaknesses are, the things that they can't do, they've had to overcome them and to make things work. They're so focused on growing the business that if they don't have the skills to do it elegantly, they'll do it any way they can. And that's the common characteristic. And so, of course, after they become successful, they may wish, but they know inside, and that's why they say they don't regret. They know inside that if they had given in to their weaknesses, and by weaknesses, I mean their inability to do things more elegantly, more acceptably, and the allowance they give themselves to be a barking boss, they know that was a very real part of their game. And so we don't want to deny that. To me, it's very, very hard to make a business profitable, and it's very, very hard to become very wealthy. And you have to be willing to do things that other people aren't willing to do. And what it boils down to is you have to be willing to push people to work harder and smarter than they naturally want to do. The second law of thermodynamics says that the way the universe works is things gradually deteriorate in a way. They get looser. And all progress is opposing that. And so, I've had this said to me by some of my proteges that are running big businesses now that are maybe, in my opinion, worse than I was. They say, Mark, I don't know any other way of getting this done. I wish I had the diplomatic skills, but this is all I can do. And I would think, yeah, you're right. You don't have that extra, but the reason that you're working for me is because your main focus is not about people's feelings. Your main focus is to grow the business. So that's the reality. I mean, I think it's true of anything. Whether you're running a business, you're growing a botanical garden, you're collecting, making an art collection, you have to have that top priority in doing. This is, in my case, it was first getting rich, but there has to be a top priority that you give completing the long-term goal. And and when push comes to shove and you have to decide what to do, you have to, if you really want to be successful, you have to subsume within the range of your ethics. I'm not talking about killing people, obviously, but within the range of your ethics, you have to be willing to do things that are that are sometimes harsh, but they're always pushing. They're always about pushing people beyond their natural inclinations or limits. This is true of me. This is how I became successful with my second mentor, was that he was relentlessly pushing me beyond where I wanted to go. And he kept notes, and anything he mentioned, he would ask me a week later, had I done it? I would leave his office with 62 things to do, and he would call me up 5 minutes later and ask me if I'd done it. I hadn't even looked at this. So I could have resented that, but I realized that he had committed to making me wealthy, and he understood that that one of my weaknesses back then was I didn't jump into movement. I wasn't a guy that just started going forward, and I needed to learn how to do that. And over the years, he taught me to do that. Now, once I want to do something, I think something's worth doing, I want to drop everything else and do that right away and keep going with it. So, that's something you have to accept. And I'm not pretending, and we shouldn't pretend by any means, that becoming wealthy gives you a better life. I don't believe that's true at all. It's very obvious to me from living in Africa, spending a large amount of time in Latin America and poor countries, that poor people are generally happier than wealthy people. But we're not talking about being happy here. We're talking about acquiring wealth and building businesses and so on. And these things require a mentality, emotionality that is, difficult and requires enormous amount of energy and persistence.
I think that was extremely impactful and good advice about mindset, because we went from this broader discussion of personally, looking back and doing something different. You expanded that out into a lesson that I think is really good and that a lot of entrepreneurs really need to internalize. And it's an uncomfortable feeling. It's one that I struggled with, certainly, where you have to adopt this mindset of pushing and growing, and not just pushing and growing things and what you're capable of, but pushing other people as well.
Right.
And a lot of people they would feel so uncomfortable doing that. I know I used to be as well. Switching topics a little bit, have you seen any noticeable evolution in the way that entrepreneurs or successful business owners grow their businesses over the last 40 years?
Well, I would say the most obvious change that's happened in the last 40 years in terms of entrepreneurship and how it's done is, all the effect of all these high-tech companies and so on, people becoming billionaires by coming up with ideas that investors put $1 billion into that are not even profitable, So there's a whole, the younger generation is all about starting a business that they can sell and cash out in. And that, that certainly the amazing stories of the people that did that, the several dozen people that did that are worth making movies about. But I don't believe that is a realistic possibility for most people. And I wouldn't advise people do that. I think you need to build your own business, a private business. I wouldn't have any interest in going public. Every experience I've had going public, and I've had a few, has been miserable. You move from, what happens is you move from trying to develop a real business, which is based on giving value to your customers at such a level that they're willing to pay you for the value plus enough for you to make a profit on. And what a profit means is that you have done your work satisfactorily. You have kept your promise. You've paid everybody that's involved, your consultants, your employees, your vendors, and at the end of the day, you still have some money left. The profit is as close as you can come to virtue, economically speaking, than anything I can think of. But when you're getting in the business of you're going to start something that's sexy and sell it out to make, it's so artificial. It has nothing to do with giving people value that they'll keep paying for. It has nothing to do with, building a business that will provide jobs for thousands of people. It has nothing to do with all the old, ideas about what is good with business. And so, I've run into, many of the young entrepreneurs today are not interested in building businesses the way I'm talking about. Radio Fire Aim is about building businesses the old-fashioned way. It's not about, coming up with an idea, hyping your business, and selling out. And, I'm not going to take a position on that. It's just I can say that every time that a partner of mine has done that, every time they've regretted it. That everything changes. You go from product quality and customer satisfaction to shareholder value, share the price of stock, and the whole business just perverts itself. And so, yeah, that's the biggest change for sure. There are, of course, other major things that have happened in the past 40 years, the most important of which is that we've gone from being largely a print and kind of mechanical industry to a digital industry, and that has had a huge impact on not just business but everything else. In terms of being successful in business, selling products, keeping customers, etc., the psychological concepts are still valid because people haven't changed, essentially. Although I do think that their expectations are gradually changing now, that there's so much that they can see for free today, that they're becoming actually more skeptical and wiser purchasers. And so some of the sales techniques that worked 20 years ago or 30 years ago don't work anymore today. I think we're moving into an economy where basically everything is going to be sampling. That whether you're selling services or information or products, that you're going to have to develop products that are better in some way, and you're going to have to develop a marketing program that allows people to test them out and generally send them back if they're not happy. And I think that's what's going on right now. It's a big challenge for conventional manufacturers, marketers, and so on. But it seems to me it's a good evolution. It's people want to be happy with their purchases, and if you can give them consistently better stuff, they feel it's well priced. They don't feel like they need a refund, and you've got a solid business.
Nice. What in the future do you think will pose a challenge, a significant challenge, that you think that the entrepreneurial advice of old doesn't necessarily prepare people for?
Well, there's no question that AI is a big challenge, and it's a big opportunity in some ways. In the short term, I think it's a huge opportunity. In the long term, I don't know what. I'm a little bit concerned about it, except if we turn into a world where most people don't work, and I forget the science fiction movie, and everybody sits around eating grapes, and and these robotic AI-generated systems take care of everything, and from farm to feeding, nutrition in your bodies. Other than that, I when I look at the current architecture of industry and all the things that are, I just see how so many of them will change so drastically. But in the short term, it seems like a huge opportunity for me. In our own business, I can see, in fact, I just had a conversation today with one of our former employees who went into AI himself. He's a guy that I wanted to promote to publisher, very smart, very innovative. And he's fully into AI now. And we were talking about how AI systems could make our business so much more profitable right now. And basically, there are two ways. One is that there are so many ways that when something is working, you can expand the revenues and sales that require just more people. But with AI, it's a program. Likewise, there are so many things that, like customer service, processing things that today we use, our business we use, maybe 800 or 1,000 people to do, because they're part automatic and part human. That will be all AI, and you're going to be dropping from 800 people to 80 people or below to do those things. And as time goes on and circumstances change, the AI will be right up with you. You don't have to. So I would say in the next 10 years, certainly, there could be enormous opportunity in our business to decrease our expenses, by at least half by implementing basic AI technology that already exists, and to increase the revenues and profits by accelerating the connection between the consumer's current interests and how fast you can deliver a product that suits that person. H&M is a company that produces clothes, and I think I remember reading this. Their key to success is they developed a clothes manufacturing system with all these little families or something in Italy. I may have this wrong, but the whole point of it was that they could keep an eye on the fashion industry of young people and find out what the current thing was, and if it went from leggings to something else, they, instead of waiting a year to 18 months, they could do it in 3 months, and that's what made them so successful. So I think those are the kind of things that are going to dramatically, and so I'm all like big with my companies on, let's get on the AI bandwagon right now. Let's do what we can do and take advantage of it. We don't know what the long term is going to be, but in the short term, there's all kinds of ways that we can reduce expenses and increase our revenues using AI.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned before about the need to push people in business. How do you decide what's reasonable to expect from people when it comes to not only your investment in them, but also their output or their work?
Okay, so it's a great question. Let me see how I can answer this. I've written many essays about productivity and motivating employees to become productive. And I read a great book on it once that was written, 60, 70 years ago, that I think really explained it to me. And that is that you can't really motivate people to do more than they're programmed to. The way to get people to do more is not to create systems of prompting, incentives, and all the silly things we do, employee of the month. None of that stuff works. You have to understand that when you hire somebody, they come with a pre-established emotional and intellectual determination about how they're going to work. Let's call it comfort zone. There are three classes. There are people that come to you that are determined to be at the very top. No matter what you give them, they're going to be at the top. And then and those are not many, 10% maybe. And then there's 10 or 20% that they come in and they want to charm you, and their job is to do as little as they possibly can. They view work, and some of my best friends are like this, as just something you want to try to avoid, get your paycheck, do nothing. And then there's everybody in the middle. So what most productivity experts do is focus on the middle. But what they don't understand is that the people in the middle have a comfort zone that says, I'm going to work and work well, but I'm not going to work my ass off. Mm-hmm. But what does working my ass off mean? They don't know. Where do they take their clues? They take their clues from the A group. That if they're working 8 hours a week, if the A group is working 10 hours a week, they'll settle for 8.5 hours. If the A group is working 9 hours a week, they may go down to 7.5. I'm talking about serious work. The people at the bottom are simply always trying to do as little as they possibly can.
Right.
They can get to 1 hour a week, they're thrilled. So the only way you can get more out of people, productivity-wise, is to ask the people that are already working harder than anyone else, the top 10% or 15%, to work even harder. And that's the simple truth. I know it from experience. It's the only people who respond positively to, only people who even consider working harder. And they will do it. Ask a busy person, if you want some, and they'll do it. And what'll happen is that middle group, when they notice that the A group went from 12 hours to 14 hours, they're going to bump themselves up an hour too, because they want to be in the middle. That's their comfort zone. And I think this happens in every realm of life, whether it's sports or education or whatnot. People are you assume they've developed over time a pre-wired comfort zone for expending energy and their time and their efforts. And so I would say that I don't think about what is too much. I ignore the middle group entirely. I do whatever I can to encourage people to, I think Jack Welch is right. You want to try to fire 10 to 15% of your workforce every year, and you will never regret firing these people. They are professionals at making you like them and making you excuse them for not doing anything. And then focus on the people that are already working too much and see what more you can ask of them. And just trust that these people are willing to work night and day for you. So if you're asking too much of them, they will come back and tell you. But they won't complain. They will come back and say, I want to do this, but this is what we need to do it, which is what you'll need to do. So that's my answer to that. I don't think about what the middle group wants at all, because I know that there's nothing I can do to change them. I just focus on the A's and seeing what more I can get out of them.
So we've talked a lot about building your fortune, how you built your fortune. You've talked about building businesses, serial entrepreneurship, real estate. But one thing you have not talked about is the one thing that I think is so commonly associated now with building wealth, and that is investing, specifically in stocks. Why were stocks not part of your grander wealth building strategy, and what role do stocks play in building wealth?
Good question, especially since I've been in the investment advisory publishing business for 40 years. So let me see how I can answer this. I already said I was never particularly interested in stocks per se. It was to me, it was a form of intellectual entertainment, competition that I just wasn't attracted to particularly. It was complex. As I learned about businesses, I realized that there was some sense to my instinct to avoid, trading my own stocks, and it was, as I went from having one business to dozens of businesses, it was very hard for me to predict what the future was for any one of my businesses. Even the profitability of the next year was often difficult to prove, to be sure of. So I thought, well, geez, if I have 8 businesses in one industry I'm an expert, an absolute expert about, and I actually control these businesses, and still I'm not entirely sure about who will do better and who will do worse. And the stock market it's an interesting thing. It's not just a group of companies whose shares are traded publicly, and that has a group of analysts, smart and dumb analysts that are trying to figure out what's going on. But it has also the millions of investors in the stock market who, by and large, react emotionally that can move the whole market in ways that are not necessarily predictable or rational. And I just felt like, boy, that's a lot of work. I mean, I could tell that, if I had to focus on picking my own stocks, I would have no time to do real estate, to start other businesses, to get involved in any of the other ventures that I got involved in. And then I read a few books on investing. This was 3 or 4 years after I was publishing investment advice. By that time, I was an expert in knowing what investors wanted to hear to subscribe to your particular analysts, but I was not an expert in the content itself. And I think I read 2 books that kind of cemented my instinct. One was written not by Warren Buffett, by his niece or something. It was about his investing method. And I think I read that when we were working together. But before then, I read a book that was published, I'm sure you know it, a guy who runs a bunch of funds. He's well known. He's written a bunch. Boyle, no. He's written a bunch of books, and he basically says, look, if you don't want to get seriously involved in stocks and spend 4 to 6 hours a day, just buy index funds. This is basically what Warren Buffett and a lot of the most successful investors did. And so I thought, gee, what am I going to do? I mean, I feel like I should learn more about this business because it's a business I'm in, but I'm not going to be an advisor. I'm a publisher, and I'm a marketing guy. I'm learning how to sell these products. I don't think I need to be an expert in them, per se. I sold all kinds of things in my life. I've sold health products. I've sold jewelry. I've sold watches. I've sold jackets. I've sold TVs. I didn't know much about any of those things, but I knew how to sell. So I didn't think it was a good overall strategy for me. And also because of my personality, if I started to do well as a stock picker, my head would blow up too quickly. I was once in Las Vegas. I remember I learned this. This is early, many years ago. And I was feeding a slot machine. Mm-hmm. And I had a system going where I would put a quarter, then 2 quarters, and 3 quarters, and 1 quarter, and 2 quarters, or whatever it was. And I've got like 6 or 8 old ladies next to me, and I'm killing it. I'm just killing it for about 20 minutes. And I started thinking, these people are so stupid. They have no idea how to make these machines work, but I do. And that thought was actually coming into my brain. Now, of course, my rational brain was horrified by my emotional brain trying to put this into my head. And it terrified me, and I realized that, I have an instinct to give in to irrational emotions about investing or gambling. So between those two experiences, I decided I'm much better off if I believe in stocks. Getting 10% a year over 100 years is a very nice return. But my extra time is better spent on doing something that I know more. And so there are two things two reasons why my stock strategy developed into a very safe one, a conservative one. And that is, I realized that of all the businesses and activities, financial activities I got in, the ones where I made the most money were ones where I had a deep knowledge of the industry, and I could control my company, the company that was in it. I could stop this or start this. And you don't have that with stocks. So my ambition later on was to develop my own, in teaching about wealth building. I wanted to give something to people that I knew didn't want to just invest in index funds, that they just like stocks too much, and they weren't going to be happy with 10% over 100 years. And so I consulted with the best people I knew in our business, and we must have had 60 analysts there. Consulted with the top 3. And from those discussions, I, with their help, created a portfolio that was more or less like an index portfolio, but it was kind of, my instructions were, build me a portfolio that Warren Buffett would build if he was me at this time. And so it was, it's a conservative portfolio that recognizes that we're in a market, a high-tech market where there are some different rules. And then they knew that I wanted it to be safe, that I most importantly, I didn't want to lose money on it. And that gave me the freedom not to worry about it. So I invested in that, and I never worry about it. I haven't touched it. When they make a recommendation or you make a change, I just make it, and I'm happy with it because I know that nobody's trying to do the thing that gets everybody in trouble, which is to double or triple the rate that the natural market wants to give you. So I mean that's and I had that same approach with bonds and with almost all the financial asset classes that I don't know anything about and I can't control. That's what I do. I aim for a normal return. If I could partner with somebody that might give me a bit of an edge, that's fantastic. But I'm not going to spend my time, reading newsletters 6 or 8 hours a day and then taking stabs at things so I can tell my friends how smart I am.
I do that just to help people get slightly above the market return. And so, yeah, just that, you're absolutely right about that 4 to 6 hours a day, like spent actually looking at K1s.
And that's what you need to get that extra point or two. And that point or two over a lifetime of investing can mean tens of millions of dollars. It can be big, especially if you include how you reinvest profits and so on. But I knew that I could make more money than that by spending those 4 or 6 hours doing something else.
That's been the big realization / I want to say disappointment ever since I went really hard into investment analysis, which is that, even if people do everything right for decades, stocks are always going to give you a natural ceiling to how wealthy you can get.
Right.
And unless you are insanely lucky to the point of winning the lottery, but while at the same time risking everything to do so, you're just better off either building wealth a different way, either through something that you can leverage safely like real estate when the market is a little bit more sane, or in something like business, which you actually, I think now at this point in human society, there's more opportunity to start business than at any other previous point.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, no, I 100% agree, and I'm very grateful for your work in getting that extra percent or two out of the market that you've done over the years. But in terms of developing personal wealth, look, wealth building to me is entirely different from the world of investing, which means stocks and bonds. Stocks and bonds is a whole separate world into itself, where you're always trying to beat the market, and the smartest people in the world are even trying harder. It's a game where being smart doesn't give you a great advantage. Occasionally it does, but even Peter Lynch, after an amazing 25 years, he hit the wall too. We all eventually hit I don't want to hit a wall. I just want to take the 10% or 11 or 12% I can get over 40 or 50 years and put my energy into other things that I actually can know more about and can control.
Yeah.
And I think that's the fundamental difference, I think, between investing and building wealth.
One of the things that I learned over the course of my career of doing this and talking to other professionals, and I've been studying for my Series 65 and becoming an RIA and things like that. Even the professionals don't try to beat the market. The smartest people in the world, they're not interested in beating the market.
Right.
If anything, they're interested in getting slightly under market returns. And just trying to reduce some proxy for risk that some scholar invented 35 years ago.
Yeah. Well, the smart ones certainly take that position.
Yeah.
Because they realize that they're getting paid along the way. And actually, this was a realization that our most successful publisher made. He said, everybody wants to beat the market, and we can all try to beat the market, but the one thing you never want to do is blow up your investors by putting them into a bad situation, because that they'll never forgive you for. You're making them poor. And so it makes sense to me that the savvy investors, if they have, they're smart, they have an approach, an analysis, it makes sense, people like them. If they can just keep track of the market, those people are going to get rich over time, because they're hitting 10% over the long run. That's a very good return. You can't do better than that, except, like I say, you can try to do a point or two better. But by and large, you can't do better than that.
Yeah.
You can do better than that in real estate. And real estate is way simpler than the stock market. The amount of information you need to know. I mean, just think of it. The stock market is ridiculous. You need to pretend that you know the stock market. And the average investor that I talk to, like my people in my family, when they tell me they're buying a stock, they've read an article. They're talking about a stock that's in an industry they know nothing about. They know nothing really about the company. They've read a story about the company, about something that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And, of course, this is how you sell these things. But if you talk to somebody that was deep into that industry, they might tell you 8 ways that that's not probably going to happen that you don't know about. So, that's to me, it's kind of a gambling instinct, but I also recognize and appreciate that people love doing that. They enjoy doing that. And if we publish many newsletters that try to help people do that, and hopefully do that safely. So an analyst that has $1 billion worth of investment, if he's smart, he knows if he can just track the market, people will probably stay with him.
Yeah.
And why try to beat it? Some people do, and some of the best, smartest people I know try to do nevertheless because they convince themselves that they can do it. But eventually, you're going against nature, basically. Mm-hmm. So I'd rather go with the flow. You're swimming against the current, basically, when you're trying to double or triple the market rates or any asset natural rates return.
Yeah. It's I'm only talking more at this point in the interview because I've been drinking with you. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about something that I just am immersed in so much. It really is that constant trade-off between risk and reward. And when you are striving for returns greater than, 10 to 12%, yeah, you can hit it. Mm-hmm. As a trader, as an investor, you can absolutely hit it for 1, 2, 5 years. Right. But for most people, their investment career, quote unquote, their trading career has to last 10 to 40 years. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've seen from every test, and also just out of hubris, I've been challenging traders in my life almost every single year I've done this, where they say, I have a system that can beat the market. I say, okay, I bet you that I can do better than you. And I say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to invest $20 every day into 3 index funds. At the end of the year, we'll see who has more money.
Right.
And I've won every single year that I've done that.
Wow.
And it really just comes down to, if you deliver 7% returns 1 year, people will be disappointed. Mm-hmm. But if you can deliver 7% returns every year, or at least a majority of the years, you're going to make people wealthier. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't have that mindset where they can stick to something for long enough to benefit from that.
Right.
But the people who do, I found, really do appreciate it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, I talk about 10%, but I remember when I was having some discussion about some business we were doing, me and my current partner. It was a different business. And it looked like we were going to get like a 5% return on our money. And it was like no risk. Mm-hmm. And I was like, 5%? I don't want to do that. It's ridiculous. And he said, oh, no, 5% is a pretty good return. And it shocked me. I knew he knew more about investing generally than I did, but it made me start to pay attention. And, I say 10%, but you're right. 7% can make you rich too. You don't actually have to meet or exceed the market rates. But if you're going to be an individual investor and you're going to try, I understand that. Let's shoot for 12%. Let's not shoot for 20 or 30%.
Yeah.
And spend our spare time doing other things which are very rewarding, that will require your time, but things that you can control and be proud of.
Yeah.
Even
agree.
like collecting art, it's its own world. Believe it or not, it's simpler than the stock market. It's not as simple as real estate. But if you follow some rules, you can pretty much assure yourself that your investment will appreciate over time.
One thing that you taught me about art investing, so let's step away from the fact that art investing has so much opportunity in it because it is a largely illiquid market. Mm-hmm. That is, if you have one piece, you're only going to have so many data points along the way of what that piece is actually worth to other people. Mm-hmm. Stock market, people are trading in and out of Apple,
right?
Hundreds of times per second.
Right.
But a single, Vasily Kandinsky piece, might sell once every 13 years. And then, you can only approximate its value by looking at comparable pieces
Right.
or pieces by the same artist or people
Right.
from the same period.
Right.
And so, a lot of that opportunity comes from the fact that, like, you can hold something and then wait for a moment, almost like marketing, for something to get in vogue or for
Right.
something to become
Right.
more popular.
Right.
And so for me, art investing is less about like the logic of investing and more about the logic of marketing, which is something that you're very familiar with. And that is, I think, why you've been successful at that.
This is interesting. Okay, first of all, the art market is not one thing; it's several markets. Okay,
Right. Real estate too. Yeah.
real estate too. Right. So I'm in the art market. I'm very conservative. If you want to make big money, you invest in the trends and the contemporary trends, but that means you can lose too. If you want to make like the bond market, you buy like Rembrandts, and they're going to give you, a 6% return every year, regardless. If you want to make money, and if you look at these studies where they show that the art market beats out stocks and everything else, these are the market where you're buying contemporary artists like Basquiat, is that his name? These currently hot or recently dead artists that are trending, and there you can have those huge numbers. It's almost like penny stocks, except it's better because it's easier to identify the trends for sure, especially if you're in the art market. You're really all you need to know about the art market is who are the trendy people and what are they buying, and when are they going to give up. So for me, what I like, where I am, is I buy mostly artists who are already established. They're already in museums and books. And so I don't think their values, and artists that are not only in museum and books, but that have at least $500 million worth of purchase behind them. So I know that there's a potential that these things can increase significantly in the future, as opposed to investing in Rembrandts where they won't. It's shocking to realize that, but when you're investing in the greatest art, that market is so stabilized that it's not going to give you the same returns. The big returns are in the contemporary, the still living artists. I'm in the middle. People that have died, that are established, they're in museums, but their potential can be significant depending on how you approach it. My approach, I could spend for hours talking about this. My approach was to buy into Central American art, which the modernist period of Central American art, the modern period will always be, I believe, it's always been a strong market. It retains its value everywhere. It still has. The modernist period in Central American art was about 10 years after it was in Europe and America, 10 to 15 years. But the quality of the stuff is exactly as good for many reasons I could talk about later. But so I invest in that market knowing that if I pay $65,000 for the best artist, a significant work of the best artist in that market, there's a very good chance that if that country becomes wealthy in the future, for which I believe there's a very good chance, that piece will be worth $6 million or $65 million, because these are dead people. There's a limit to it. And the way it works in that market is that you go from being art market is very localized, so it's kind of like real estate. So the art is bought by people in its own country, and then it goes to regional, like Central American. Other people buy it, and then it goes to international. Once it goes to international, its prices go very high. So that's why I did that. For me, it's a fun project. I think the risk is low. quite low. The potential is very good. I'll never see it in my lifetime, but I'm trying to create the largest collection of Central American modernist masters that exist, and I can probably do that with like $10 million or $50 million worth of investment. That could easily be worth $1 billion sometimes in the future. It's in a nonprofit. It's not going to be mine or for my family, but it will be for a museum in the future, and that to me is an exciting, something fun to leave behind. The great industrialists, the turn of the century, they did a lot of things that people criticize, but they, these guys changed the world, and what they did is they left behind museums and museums and libraries and all kinds of public institutions that enrich everybody's life today. So I think that's a fairly good trade-off.
To sort of bring this and bridge this conversation towards a conclusion, I've been working with your ideas. I've been working with your ideas and your words and your philosophy for 10 years at this point. And one of the things that has really resonated with me and has really informed a lot of what I try to tell people is that there are basically 5 intrinsically valuable skills at this particular juncture in human society. I don't believe that there's a homogeneity here. I think that it could have been different at other times and in other economic systems, but you've said that the most intrinsically valuable skills are sales, marketing, capital allocation or profit management, you said, people management or leadership, and product creation. And I think that's true. And I've looked elsewhere. I've looked pretty far abroad, and I've not really found anything that's really convinced me that that's untrue. Mm-hmm. So imagine you're talking to a 17-year-old right now. What of those 5 skills would you recommend really digging into and learning and focusing on first and foremost of all of them?
It's a good question, because we're now in a world where AI exists, and we don't know how much AI will be able to take over sales and marketing. Certainly a significant portion of it. Will AI be able to contribute to product development? I don't know. But assuming that AI doesn't quickly turn the world into some science fiction fantasy, if I had to rate those skills, I would say this. I would say the first skill is salesmanship. That's the first thing you need to learn. Everything depends on that. And salesmanship teaches you the emotional characteristics that you need to have to not only be able to sell your customers, to be able to sell your partners and your employees, to persuade people to follow the ideas that you think are good. The second is marketing. Marketing is the kind of like the landscape of how you sell. Every generation, and now probably every 3 or 4 years, the landscape changes, and the vehicles that you use to do your selling change. The audience changes, their expectations changes, and all that is kind of it's to a large part technical. Good marketers are kind of technical analysts. They can see the trends and the statistics, and they're motivated to move towards the activities and operations that have better data points. And so I think marketing will continue to be very important. And in fact, if you don't know marketing and you just know selling, you could be very successful, but you're a bit of it at a disadvantage because you don't know the marketing part, and somebody plops you into the wrong marketing environment and you're skills won't work. Of the others, I would say this about profit management, capital allocation. I like to think of it as profit management because profit itself is unnatural. In every business, if everybody did the right thing, treated everybody nicely, your vendors, your customers, your employees, what do your vendors want? They want to charge you more and give you less expensive products. Your employees want to be paid better and have more time off. And your customers want everything for free. So if you're trying to accommodate everybody and be a good person, the natural profit is zero. So this gets us back to this core emotional personality that you need to develop, where you're willing to be an irritant to everybody but your customers because they're paying the bill. So in any business, I think that the third thing is the person that's willing to be that irritant, that's willing to forever be reducing costs and pushing people to increase revenues. It's a very valuable skill, and very few people have it. And it's not just as the business grows. It's not just that you can do it as a bully in a small business, but as the business grows, you can't bully people into doing that. You have to have finesse. You have to have intelligence and rhetorical skills. But I'm not going to, I'll just say that for a moment. Product development, of course, that's a special thing in and of itself. It's kind of like the genius factor. It's the person that's always thinking of, well, if we do it this way, and those people will always be around. But the way I feel about that is either you have it or you don't. If you have it, I wouldn't start there. I would start in the other areas where you can naturally promote yourself and to a position of power. And then if you have an idea, people will do it because you're in a position of power. What was the, I missed one.
Leadership or people management.
Yeah, leadership and people management. That too is like at that top level. Once the business is really running well, it's kind of like we talked about a promotion. Once you got the lead right and people are buying into the idea, the rest of the package is a question of not fucking it up. To me, that's how I see leadership, honestly. I see it as you need to have the skills, and they're considerable skills that I don't claim to have, to be working with a bunch of very ambitious, aggressive, growing type growers, I call them, entrepreneurs, and make things run smoothly. But I would say those are when the business gets bigger, and that's when those people become useful and get paid a ton of money. I don't think you want to start your career off by learning leadership skills. No. You want to, I would say you start with sales, then you go to marketing, and then you go to profit management, and then the others come after that. Those are three skills that you can develop certainly just simply by learning about them and practicing them. And that will put you into a leadership position of any business that you enter. I will say one more thing for younger people is that I would much rather get a job for $60,000 working for a small business that's growing, than $150,000 for a giant business that's stable. Your chances of becoming wealthy are infinitely greater with a smaller company that's growing because, if you're good and you get in early, they're only paying you $60,000, you're a marketer, you're a salesperson, copywriter, whatever, and you continue to do better and show up and spend the time, you're going to eventually be at that top echelon. When the company becomes $100 million or $1 billion company, you're going to be in the top 6 or 12 people that are making all the money. So that's something to be considered too for younger people, I think.
I think that's really good advice. So you and I just recently filmed a course, sort of going into the weeds of and then elaborating on what you taught in Ready, Fire, Aim. And we're going to keep adding to this course to teach not only entrepreneurs, but also wealth builders about every facet of building wealth that you've learned over the course of your career. So this would be the normal point where we would plug that course and tell people that there is a link in the description and they should check it out below. But we're not going to do that. Instead, I want to do something a little different. Instead of promoting this course, I want to ask you, what ideally would you want a course on wealth building and entrepreneurship to include? One, to tell me what to focus on and do and create to help people as much as humanly possible towards this particular goal. And two, to also tell people watching this in the future what they can expect to see in the product when I finally get around to making it.
Okay, so Ready, Fire, Aim it's a book about entrepreneurship, starting your own business. And I wrote that book with to answer the specific question that you asked. If I want to start my own business, what are the first things I need to do? What should I not worry about? Where should I spend 80% of my time? And so I develop it according to 4 different levels of the business growth. But entrepreneurship is just one of a dozen different ways of getting wealthy. And so I think that if the program is about getting wealthy, then you have to kind of do the same thing in every area. I think you can get very wealthy as an employee in a business. And I have lots of ideas about what you should do and you shouldn't do because in a sense, I was never an employee, but I was always, I've got plenty of businesses where I'm the top dog, but there's side businesses. But my primary business, I was always second banana. And so I think I learned a lot about how to become wealthy as an employee. Because even if you have equity, if you're working for somebody that has 60% and you have 15%, you're an employee, whether you like it or not. So I have a lot to say about that, and some of which I've written about already. But that is certainly one way to go. And then there are people in other situations, like people that are near retired or retired, and I have lots of thoughts on those. But I think your framework is right. Like, tell me 3 things I should never do, and that are mistakes. And I've thought about that and have written about that, and I would include that in such a program. And then tell me the 3 things I should first do, that I should, always you need the Pareto principle of 80% of your time should be devoted to the 20% of the things that are going to make the difference. So what are those 20%? What are those 3 things that you want to do in this first stage and then in the second stage? So, so that's how I would design it. I would design it according to the audience, which presumably would be comprised of employees, entrepreneurs, freelancers, professional type people. And in each case, structure it the same way, just like you said. What are the things I definitely shouldn't do? What are the 3 most important things to do at each stage? And, just kind of lay it out. And I think I know from all the feedback I've gotten from Ready, Fire, Aim that has helped a lot of people. It hasn't made everybody successful because it's like teaching piano. You don't know that everybody's going to keep doing it and keep doing it right and pay attention. But I've had so many people tell me that they have $10 million businesses, $100 million businesses, $4 million businesses by using Ready, Fire, Aim as a template for building their business. I'm very grateful for it, and that makes me very pleased. And I think that we can do the same thing for employees and for freelance professionals too, because I've been all those things. I feel like, and I think it's developing wealth is not as mysterious and complicated as sometimes people try to make it out to be, especially people that have gotten wealthy and want you to believe that they're geniuses. I tend to side with Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, who say that the way that they got wealthy is not by trying to be smarter than the next guy, but just trying to not be dumber. And I think if you take that approach, your risk of sabotaging yourself is much, much lower, and the risk of and the opportunity to build long-term wealth is much greater. Almost guaranteed.
Almost guaranteed.
Almost guaranteed.
That'll fly by the FTC. Right. That's fine. Mark, thank you so much for your time tonight, for taking this moment to answer questions, to talk about your story. I truly and sincerely hope that it proves to be helpful to people, inspirational to people, and ultimately a guide that ultimately launches this particular venture that we're working on to the next level, so that other people can benefit from it continuously in the future.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you. And at my stage of life, there's nothing more rewarding than to meet somebody who tells me their life story and feels like that I've helped them improve it in some way. I mean, that's a way better feeling than somebody giving me a car, which I don't need. So, so yeah, I hope so. I think we're doing something that's a bit different from what everybody else is doing, because the large part of the industry is focusing on investing, and investing is a part of wealth building. But if you want to become wealthy, you have to learn how to build wealth, and investing is only a part, it may be 1/5. And so we want to teach all those other parts, which will make the investing side way less risky, way less complicated, and make the wealth building side more fun and more possible. So
wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for joining us for this conversation.